is that if a Minister or the Minister of State from the relevant department is not available, they will inform the Clonmel Courthouse office before 12, and an opportunity will then be given to the Deputy to defer it until another time. Right. Deputy Tommy Broughan.
Thanks, Ken. I'm delighted to have the opportunity, last Ken, to briefly contribute to the Firearms and Offensive Weapons Amendment Bill 2019. The short bill, of course, will amend Section 9 of the 1990 Firearms and Offensive Weapons Act, and the key purpose, of course, is to increase the maximum sentence for knife crime to 10 years, up from 5. So, first of all, I'd like to commend Deputy Jim O'Callaghan and Fianna Fáil for bringing forward the legislation following 4 tragic deaths by knife attacks in Dublin this summer. As the Minister knows, because again you were deputising a few times for Minister Flanagan, I have been also raising the serious issues of criminal antisocial behaviour with the Taoiseach, with your colleague Minister Flanagan, and of course with Garda Commissioner Harris and the Chief Superintendents of the district in my constituency of DBN. As you remember, Minister, earlier this year, of course, the whole community in Dublin Bay North, we were astonished and flabbergasted, after a series of murders in broad daylight, people being gunned down in cold blood, one in front of a school, and a whole wave of terrorisation of the local community. As I said, some parishes which are profoundly affected are still trying to recover. It has to be said, Minister, I contacted at that time the Taoiseach. I contacted your colleague, Minister Flanagan, and I asked them for to take proactive steps. You might remember we had an emergency. I tried to adjourn the Dáil. We had an emergency topical issues debate on those events in the late spring and early summer. I asked Minister Varadkar, or Taoiseach Varadkar, to look again at the Dublin Bay North constituency, at areas which this explosion of desperate, dastardly crimes occurred in the context of some of the work that was being done in Dublin Central and Dublin Central constituency, which the Taoiseach in fact referred to this morning. In terms of the Mulvey Commission, the Mulvey report, and then obviously the delivering of additional resources to hard-pressed communities. A meeting was held to which non-Fine Gael deputies and ministers were not invited, which people were rightly very upset about, the kind of politicisation of the necessary response. I never heard of it or saw it happening under, indeed, another government and previous governments. Generally speaking, everybody, both national and local representatives, would be invited to key meetings. I know that North-South Partnership was chosen, I think, which is based at one of our campuses in Coolock. It was chosen to lead an overall response to this wave of serious antisocial behaviour and criminality. But it has to be said, Minister, that on the ground, although we do have some small additional numbers of Gardaí, we don't see the impact, the necessary impact. For example, on a walkabout last Friday in part of my constituency, I turned around into a large amenity open space, and there was a burnt-out car. And bits of other burnt-out vehicles, and residents told me about the kind of, again, horrendous atmosphere that had occurred on the previous night with undoubtedly drug-fuelled antisocial behaviour and crime. So, particularly, by the way, Minister, on the run-in to Halloween, which is always the Halloween festival. It's not just, obviously, it's Brexit this year, and it's we're going to have really dramatic weeks ahead. But every single year since I've been in politics and before it, the run into the Halloween festival has been an excuse for miscreants to totally misbehave and very often terrorise communities. So in the Dublin North Division, North Central divisions of An Garda Síochána, we need to see continued strong response under Commissioner Harris. Garda figures, of course, have shown an increase of 66% in knife seizures since 2016, with 1,200, I think, seized that year, 1,600 seized in 2017 and 2,000 seized in 2018. Of course, Gardaí say the increase in seizures could be, and probably is, down to the increased number of personnel we're at last beginning to see out on the beat. But we also obviously do know, or do need, as Deputy Sherlock was saying, to look at the whole situation, obviously, of statistics as well in this area. I note that the CSO recorded crime figures for Q2, of course, of 2019 shows in the offence group weapons and explosive offences there was an increase of 6.6% from 2,427 in 2018 to 2,588 in 2019. And of course, attempts and threats to murder, assaults, harassments and related offences also increased by nearly 7% from 19,253 in 2018 to 20,656 in 2019. But it was reported in May, as we've heard earlier, that the CSO doesn't report on knife crime, which is quite astonishing and very important on this bill we're discussing today, and does report on knife crime because of the lack of consistency, Lascan, in reporting this crime on pulse across different Garda divisions and stations. And I heard, Minister, that a working group was expected to report to the Garda executive in July this year on knife crime, seizures and assaults against the person. So could you maybe come back in your response speech and tell us how is that working group getting on? Has it completed its report, and will this legislation be a help to the group in devising a future policy? I note that Minister Kevin Moran, he's calling for a knife amnesty, and again I'd echo that call. I presume Deputy O'Callaghan would as well, and also say that we need, we've had weapons amnesty in the past. We had one in 2006, which Deputy Stanton will remember. We were together in the House here, and that resulted in hundreds of firearms, knives and swords being handed into An Garda Síochána. Replica firearms and a grenade, I remember, were also handed in at that time. But of course it was before the Criminal Justice Act of 2006, so we gave a last chance to those, to people who had offensive weapons to bring them in. The Taoiseach, of course, said that this morning again that he was a follower of the old Blairite policy of toughen crime, toughen the causes of crime. That certainly was always my policy when I was a spokesperson in the Labour Party, that you have to deal with it in both directions. You have to absolutely stop bad behaviour and antisocial behaviour and criminality, nip it in the bud before it starts at the very earliest opportunity, and then try to put in the resources to help young people to lead normal lives. But the question is asked, of course, about young men and male teenagers carrying knives and knife-like weapons, and we've seen in lots of reports from London, a very fine report there recently on the BBC Newsnight about the devastation that the carrying of knives is doing, particularly in South London and in other areas of the UK. Obviously, tougher penalties are necessary, but we also need steps being taken by community policing teams, to increase their presence, their approachability and helpfulness. And the other thing I would just say to Deputy O'Callaghan, I don't know whether he's been in touch with anybody who represents the manufacturers of these weapons. There's an area here in business, manufacturers, suppliers, even including people on the web. Why do you need like a long-bladed knife that is kind of a flick blade or whatever, or a flick knife? Like, why should there exist such a product? So there's a responsibility, I think, on business, especially in the European Union, other countries of the European Union, and in the UK to address this in particular. But in the UK, of course, as I've been saying, Cancorla, we've heard many stories about increasing knife seizures and crime over a number of years. In the 12 months up to the end of March this year, there have been an astonishingly more than 43,500 knife crime offences in the UK, which is 80% higher than 2014. And the 44 police force, of course, across the UK, are again coming up against this major problem. So that's why I think Deputy O'Callaghan's bill, it's really timely, it's very important, because we need to address this and to deal with it as soon as possible. So in conclusion, I'd like to again commend Deputy O'Callaghan and his Fianna Fáil colleagues for coming forward with this bill, which I think we should speedily enact. Thanks.